I was talking with him before the meeting started, and he has a lot of interesting things that go far beyond the usual type of thing that we deal with at these meetings. Our speaker talking on U.S. Army mules in World War II is Ted Perry. He comes from Stowe. He's a graduate of Williams College, and he enlisted in the Army and dealt with these mules, obviously, in 1942. He's a retired Master Sergeant from the Army. He is a general manager of one of ATT's divisions, and he's, to say the least, a sailing enthusiast who has sailed around North and South America with his wife, and I guess on occasion stayed on the boat for 11 months at a time. So please welcome Mr. Perry.
Thank you. I don't know whether you can hear me back there, but I'll holler if you can't. The purpose of this quote, lecture, unquote, is to tell you some things that you may not know about World War II. I notice there's some veterans here, either from World War II or Vietnam or even Korea. But I wonder how many of you served with mules. That's our subject. To set the flavor and tell you why I'm here now, I was a spoiled little rat when I was growing up. And I was a freshman at college and decided I should ski during the war because some of my waspy friends had joined the 10th Mountain Ski Division and allegedly were going to Davos or the Alps to spend the whole war skiing. And I said, that's for me. So I enlisted in, at that time, was the 10th Mountain Infantry Division. I sort of overlooked the word infantry in that. I thought it said 10th Mountain Ski Division. And I had planned to spend those 4 years in the service doing this. Well, I got out to Camp Carson, Colorado, and 2 days later, this nice chap turned out to be a mean, rotten drill sergeant. I thought he was a nice chap when I interviewed him. Wanted to know, had I ever ridden a horse? As I said, I was a spoiled little rat. I said, oh, all my life, my daddy had horses. I played polo. Oh, I know all about horses. Which really was what he was looking for. Because 2 days later, I was on a train to some place called Oklahoma, to a place called Fort Sill, and it was populated by foreigners from Texas and Alabama and those odd places I'd never even heard of, let alone been to. And that's how I started in the mule pack, or the pack artillery. When we arrived there, we expected to be picked up by truck and greeted by whoever was doing that stuff. But I thought something was wrong when that's what greeted us. We expected a bus at least. And it was even worse when the first sergeant was riding his own private vehicle, which we can't seem to bring up at the moment. Pardon me, gentlemen and ladies. Here we go again. We'll get there. Okay, we were greeted by the first sergeant in his private vehicle, which I thought, you know, it just made me think something was wrong. I was a fast learner. Well, the whole purpose of the pack artillery, which was started in the Civil War, was to carry certain firearms on the back of mules in harm's way. That was the idea. And it was introduced at great expense to both men and mules in World War I. This is what we were supposed to carry. It's a 75 millimeter pack howitzer, and it breaks into 6 loads, or 6 mules to 1 howitzer. Now, when you start adding up the number of mules needed to carry lots of these guns, you run into lots of mules, because each one of these took 6 mules. Then you needed 6 mules to carry the ammunition for the 6 mules. Then you needed 6 mules to carry the food for the first 6 mules, plus 3 more to carry food for the last 6 mules, and it goes on and on and on. We didn't have any moving vehicles. And that shocked the bejeebers out of me, having been a spoiled little brat, as I said, with my own convertible at Williams College. There were no trucks. What we had was a Conestoga wagon. That's a 3-span team hauling it, which is exactly the same as they used in 1846 on the treks across the nation. It's called, anybody know what that was called?
Prairie schooner.
Prairie schooner from the back row. That's because of all the canvas on top. They weighed about 2,400 pounds empty and about 5,000 pounds fully loaded. We had lots of them, but I didn't see any Jeeps or trucks. Now, in addition to the Conestoga, we had a small vehicle. This was a great help to all of us Yankee citizenry kids who'd never seen a wagon and never wanted to see another one. Well, these were all hauled by mules. How do you get a mule? You breed a male jackass, no, not a politician, a male jackass to a horse stallion. I'll try that again. You breed a male jackass to a female horse. If one were to breed a female jackass to a horse stallion, you get a hinny. You get a lady mule, of which were very few. This is a little quote, one of the few I'll give you, came from the historian of the 10th Mountain Division, 601 Regiment. He also went to the mules, to his horror. First of all, the mule is a strong, sturdy, intelligent animal that is easily trained to carry very awkward and heavy loads on narrow and rough and steep mountain trails. Also, the mule is self-disciplined, so it will not overeat or overdrink and make itself sick as a horse will do. That much of it's true. The biggest word in there is strong-willed. Now, the mules, male mules, regretfully, are sterile. In deference to the ladies here, I'll temper my next remarks by just saying they don't know that. They think that they're put on this earth to make more mules, but they can't. Guess who had what duty as his first week in the Army cleaning what? I'll leave the rest of you to your imagination. Now, the Army had photos in all our barracks of what they think is the perfect mule. That's a hinny. That's a lady mule. Her name was Katie. Why she has an S handicapped on her rump, I haven't the slightest idea. She's carrying 2 wheels and the breech block of a 75 millimeter pack howitzer. If we had our right complement of mules and the right complement of guns, a battalion could have up to 300 mules with associated men to take care of those mules. And a regiment could have up to 3,000 mules. So the mules added up very quickly. I think this was a much better pinup. Anybody know her? Rita Hayworth. Loved by millions and millions of GIs. For a while I thought I was the only one that loved her, but I found everybody else did too. Now, I'm going to digress a little bit and tell you about leisure time in the pack artillery before we go overseas. That was different than the leisure time in most Army outfits. One of the games we played was unseat 'em. It had another term, but we'll call it unseat 'em. The bare shirts against the shirted players. No saddles, just bridles. Pull the other guy off. Maybe he gets stomped on, maybe he doesn't. The last guy standing, or riding, either with a t-shirt or without a t-shirt, determined the winner. That lasted for some time. There was lots of bloody people going on. Now, I'm going to talk to you about the baseball games that we had every Saturday morning. There are 5 rules. 1, you must be on the mule when you want to throw the ball, catch the ball, hit the ball. The mule doesn't know that. Number 2, if you go toward first base, everything is fair except sliding. You can't slide into first base because you and the mule have to get there, one on top of the t'other. Sometimes you got there on the bottom as the mule tried to push the other mule, who was the first baseman, out of the way. Now the batting mule, and I don't know what else to call him, except the mule at bat, he had a problem. Don't forget these are pack mules, not riding mules. And they're not accustomed to having the weight change on their back because the saddles are pretty well secured. So the batting mule has his rider, and the rider pulls back the bat, and the mule sees this piece of wood coming out his head and takes off. The trouble is, he takes off usually to third base because the batter will say is right-handed. Now the mule taking off to third base scares the living bejabbers out of the third base mule, who of course decides to run whichever way the home plate mule is moving, I'm moving. Sometimes it took 10 minutes to get all the players back where they belong. Now if you were at bat and lucky enough to hit one, let us assume that you hit a ground ball between first and second, and you're still on the mule. So you say, in a few well-chosen, unladylike terms, get yourself going, mule. And you kick him in the slats. The mule says, ho ho, I can go home. The mule takes off from home plate to first base because the stables are in direct line after first base. Home plate, first base, stables. Hey, the boss wants me to go home. I'm on the way, says the mule. Meanwhile, the outfielder has gotten off his mule to try and get the baseball back, hoping the mule will be there when it gets back on the mule to throw the ball back. The longest game I remember was about an inning and a half. It was fun, though. I could go on for a long time about mule baseball. You'd have a lot of fun. Now, the other game that we played was the Ben-Hur, except we didn't know who Ben-Hur was at that time. But you put up a team is 2, and you'd race 5 miles out and 5 miles back with a wagon. No holds barred, any rules were not there. If you wanted to knock the other wagon off, if you wanted to get rid of his wheel, do anything you want. The winning wagon got the afternoon off. The mules seemed to like that because they would work as a team. You'd only get harness-driven mules for this game. You couldn't get a pack mule. They're all the same critter, but they don't know it. Well, we were also, believe it or not, supposed to be getting ready for war. And some of our equipment was a little old. That is not a cannon facing you. That's the end of what would now be called a PVC tube, but it's made out of iron. Those are carriage wheels, not howitzer wheels. And look at the mules. Aren't they having a ball? They just think that's the craziest thing they ever saw. Their ears are all perked up, and they just think that's neat. As I told you, I was so proud of my riding abilities that when I originally was asked, I've ridden all my life. Finally, I got promoted to sergeant, but I still had to learn to ride the Army way. And these are all new sergeants learning to ride the Army way, most of whom had grown up on horseback and had ridden all their lives from those foreign lands of Oklahoma and Texas and those places. They knew how to ride. Well, one of the problems that we had was that the weather's liable to be lousy in Italy. So the Army in its wisdom said, I think we'll send you back to Camp Carson for a couple of weeks to learn how to handle snow with the mules. That was an interesting experience because I thought, again, here's my time to learn to ski down Davos. No, it wasn't quite that way. The mules didn't like it any better than we did. And we walked the mules through the heaviest, deepest snow that they could find in Colorado. Even our ambulance was with us, though, so it's all right. Because we had our own ambulance. Am I still on the right page? Yes. Well, pretty soon, most of us, and some of the mules, went to that foreign land of Galveston, Texas, to practice offloading the mules from the big ship to the little ship, so when we land in some foreign land, we knew what to do. Bear with me now. Here's the big ship, called the Liberty ship, rocking like so. Here's the lighter going up and down. The object is to lower the mule in time with some roll, in time with the up and down, onto what would be like a raft. Well, the Navy thought that was great fun, and of course they'd misjudge it. The mule would break his leg, we'd shoot him and start again. We left lots of unhappy mules laying around in the surf, literally, that was the Army way of doing it. And we practiced, and we practiced. Oh, it was a tough way to practice, but I thought that was what the Army did. They knew everything, you know. Well, here we are getting ready to debark. This is now late 43. There are the mules, and there are the tanks and the trucks. They get preference. They get on first, which doesn't seem right. But the military, or the merchant marine, altered 13 Liberty ships to carry animals, primarily mules. You may recognize some of these names from characters and generals and rich people and so forth. There were 13 of them. 2 were sunk. 11 went to Burma, and the other 2 or 3 went to Italy. The Burma guys, half of our outfit went to Burma, half went to Italy. The Burma guys went even worse than we did.
Are you saying Burma?
Yeah, I put an R at the end of it because it sounds better, but it's B-U-R-M-A.
Right.
Burma. But, you know, it's like Coca-Cola. Everything has an R on it.
I just
Burma.
have trouble understanding V, but I'm having trouble understanding.
Well, I apologize, sir. That's my Yankee background. Okay, so now we've learned how to handle snow, and we've learned how to offload animals at the expense of many animals. The Army was brilliant, though. They never took one of our really well-trained pack mules for practicing offloading. They borrowed them from the local farmers. The farmers didn't always get their mules back, as I told you. Well, in any landing, and any of you gentlemen have made it landings, there's an important character at any landing. Oops, I'm sorry, I forgot my friend here. 100 mules on a sailboat, excuse me, a motorboat, a big ocean liner, whatever it is, handle seasickness very poorly. The best way to describe it is they explode both ends at the same time. And some had to be fed by hand, as this fellow is doing. The mules were just as glad to get off that ship as we were. Every morning, rain or shine, 22 days, we had to bring the mules up on deck while the Navy cleaned the stables. The Navy didn't like that any better than we did either. Well, how do we remember now my offloading experiences in Louisiana? When we got off Anzio, which is where I made the landing, my landing, I by then had an exalted title of stable sergeant. That was really great. I didn't expect to get promoted that quickly, nor in that job. And as stable sergeant, my job was to get the mules up on deck, get the sling under their bellies, and then have the Navy sling them off to the up and down boat that we practiced on in Louisiana. And I had a new colonel who was an old first sergeant from the World War I. In a few well-chosen bad words which I can't use, asked me what I was doing. And I said, what I practiced. 5 weeks, and he said, throw every one of those so-and-sos overboard. Get 6 men ashore to greet them. So I sent 6 men ashore, and we threw 100 mules off the ship. The Navy thought that was the greatest thing they'd ever seen. Have you ever seen a mule do a jackknife or a belly flop? All 4 legs out, poof, when they land? And we didn't lose a one. They drop into the water, they get down a couple of feet, they look around and say, oh, there's land, and swim to shore. We didn't lose a mule. But we lost about 20% in practice in Louisiana. So the old ways were probably the best ways. And you should have seen the grins on the CPOs in the Navy throwing the mules overboard. That would have just laughed your heart out. Oh, here's Anzio. And the most important guy in any landing, outside of the soldiers who were doing the landing, is somebody came up with Beachmaster. The Beachmaster, usually a lieutenant colonel. His job is to assign the incoming ships, LSTs, whatever was coming in, to certain portions of the beach, so they could get offloaded, get their supplies secured, and the ships go back out to wherever they came from. He hadn't the slightest idea what to do with mules. He didn't know where to put us. And he didn't know why we were there. And he didn't know how long we were going to stay. And he didn't know where the supplies were coming from to feed these things. So he left us alone. So that was my experience with the Beachmaster. He showed up once and never showed up again. I want to show you a couple of pictures of pack trains. Because, we went to the garage first. That's the garage. Sometimes called a motor pool for you military types. That was our garage. The mud on some of the pack trains was unbelievable. We're going to spend a little time talking about mud. This is a pack train on the outskirts of Rome. It's only just a bit of it. And you see the mules are loaded down. Anybody know how much weight a mule will take? Whether it be cannon or whether it be grain or whether it be whatever? Warren is close, 350. Some of the mules, if you give them 360, they won't take a step. You put the forelegs out, the half legs out, and they won't move. They really won't, and they'll stay there all night until you take something off. Then they'll look at you and say, you so-and-so, thank you, and he'd march off with the rest of them. A mule has another interesting trait, that a mule doesn't panic. If a horse fell off a little bridge with her saddle on, she'd sink to the bottom and then thrash and do all that. A mule would just sit there in the water, maybe 2 feet below the water level, waiting for somebody to come down and free her. Now, she might greet you with a kick and a bite, or each, or both, but she wouldn't panic. I saw 5 mule rattlesnake fights before we went overseas. Mule won every one of them. I saw 1 horse rattlesnake fight and horse lost. That's not really a true, shall we say, representation of the ability, but it intrigued me. This is on the lower slopes of Mount Cassino, taking food and supplies to the embedded troops near the top and taking the dead folks back down. This is the largest pack train that I recall, both either in practice or in real life. This is a pack train below a town of Fuggier, I think his name was. 280 mules make up this train. Every mule has a GI in the front and a standby soldier in the back. And the reason that is that you grab onto the mule's tail going downhill, but don't you dare touch him going uphill. Some of the newer guys would say he'll get a pull uphill, have the mule pull him uphill, and the mule would do that for about 20 seconds. And he'd get a couple of feet in his ribs, and then he'd stop hauling on. But you could run these mules or work these mules all day, feed them minimum amount of food, as long as you gave them some water, literally some water, not as much as a horse. This was a big pack train. It's 280. That was my first assignment of running a pack train. I wasn't quite sure what in the heck to do, except maybe say, okay, go. I mean, geez, that's an awful lot of mules. Now we're looking at this, and we're loading a 75 millimeter pack howitzer onto a recalcitrant mule, and there's a white mule in the background. Nobody wanted him. Why didn't anybody want him? Because he would attract fire. Because at dusk and at dawn, he would shine star out just as neat could be. And when a few, not many, when a few of the ME-109s, the planes came down, it seemed they were aiming for that guy because he showed up. We're crossing just one of the streams. It's not the Po, it's another river, I forgot the name of it. This is an interesting picture. Look at the nearest mule toward the camera, who seems to be under control, and we're crossing a stream. Some of the mules are crossing the stream. Some of the mules haven't decided whether to cross the stream or not. Next picture, things aren't quite as comfortable as they were before. It was very difficult getting across the stream. That went from a nice line of mules, eagerly one after the other, to this. Meanwhile, watching were a couple of foot soldiers thought this was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Here we are, the mule train crossing one way and the GIs crossing the other. Or shall we say the boot-mounted GIs as against the mule-mounted GIs. The foothills of the casino behind you. Mud was the big problem. Mud in Italy was just as bad as mud anywhere, but it seemed to be more pronounced. And let me show you a couple of shots. This truck can't get through there because that thing is deep. And we, the mules, had just come through there. Clippity-clop, one at a time, down the little defilade, up the hill and out again. And these truckers were not happy with us because we gave them a few choice words as we went by. These guys are even less happy because they couldn't handle the mud that the mules could. And again, that's casino in the background. And this is some of the car on the right, the colonel, not our colonel, thank heavens, a colonel, decided he needed a car. So he took this car and he went about 14 feet. And he couldn't understand why there wasn't a GI there to pull him out. And see, he asked me, now I was now a big-time sergeant. He said, "Get men and haul this car out." And I said, "As soon as I get through with where they are, sir." And I took off with the mules. And as far as I know, he's still there. There's a side view of him having a little trouble navigating the mud. When he found out that a friend of mine took that picture, he almost had him court-martialed. Luckily, he wasn't a general. He would have had a flag on his bow, and then we could have really had fun with it. That's almost self-explanatory. There's a three-span team hauling ammunition right out of World War I. Hadn't changed a damn bit. We finally got our own wire truck. Now we could lay wire between batteries and between battalions. We had our own self-propelled wire truck. And was the military delighted to give us a wire truck? The wire truck had trouble going sometimes. And this is what I signed up to do originally. Now, I have some of these slides just because I think they're neat, and I've added them to the talk. Some of the pictures I took before, one or two I took after. Most of them somebody else took after. This happens to be in, that was off the coast of southern Italy. These are pretty interesting pictures if you look at them carefully. There are the two chimneys up there. There's the two chimneys here. Is my mouse moving on the big screen? Shows before and after. There are the two church spires. Some of these are only 10 years after they were done. Some are just recently. A private home, 4 stables. Now it's a 4-car garage. There's still the same statue. It's the railroad station. It shows to me why some of the local villages didn't really love the Americans. Because they blame all this stuff on us. They forget the fact that the Germans were there first. We had to get rid of the Germans. The problem is that we ruined their towns, many towns, to get rid of the Germans. Some more of these. This is the church. It's now been redone. I think these pictures are interesting just to show how they recovered. Here's another view of the railroad station. Well, following this, I happened to be the first GI into Dachau, which is a whole other story. Which is a different story. It's not as much fun. Dachau, the war was over on May 9th. I got in Dachau on April 12th. So we'll discuss that some other time. And I've labeled this the end. Thank you all. I'm open to any questions, preferably about mules.
What happened to them?
Part again?
What happened to them? They were left behind, or when they became meat, or what?
A little of both. There are still a regiment and a half in Camp Carson, Colorado. They're sending a half a battalion to Afghanistan either last week or this week. What they're going to do, I have any idea, except it's an awful lot of Rocky Mountain country up there.
But none of those boys actually went back.
Some of the mules?
Yeah.
No. We either sold what was left. The mules didn't fare very well. Our mortality rate of mules was high, like about 100%, because we kept the mules into southern France, got attached to the French army, who thought the mules were great, and lost the last mules at the Remagen bridgehead. We just ran out of mules and need for them, and the war was going too darn fast anyhow. By the time we crossed the Remagen, we didn't have a mule with us. To my knowledge, no mules came home. Not many of my outfit did, because we were sort of sitting ducks, but there were no mules.
With a few jackasses.
Yeah, we're still getting them too. Any other questions?
I don't have a question. I just want to acknowledge to the audience that I'm a customer of his. And a very valuable service, because we were in a situation in Germany, well actually in France, attacking the Siegfried Line, when the topography was much like that slide just before you had the petition with mud and
Right.
mules,
Right.
where the distance was maybe 100 yards up a ridge, but the slope was about 25 or 25 to 30% slope. We were in that position for 4 days. And normally, an infantry line company has a Jeep with a trailer that can deliver all your rations, water, and ammunition that you need each day. And take it right up to where the men are fairly close, and then break it down to individual allotments. In this case, these mules were so valuable. I cannot tell you what it meant, because we had no way of men. If we had to have men carrying what the mules carried, we would have had to taken most of the guys we had fighting the Germans to bring these supplies up. The one problem was we were just infantrymen, didn't know anything about mules. And I have to tell the story because the mule skinners would not come up the hill. They delivered the mules to the bottom of the ridge. And the infantrymen had to be assigned to go down to the bottom and bring the mules up. Well, I had ridden horses and ponies before I went in the service, but didn't know anything about how to skin a mule. And actually, those of us that got assigned to that job, it was
Learn on the job.
yeah, it was kind of a, hey, you, and of the 4 days we were up there, I caught that detail. It came every day. And of the 4 days we were up there, I caught it 2 days. And we soon learned how to skin the mules. It wasn't any great technology, but I wanted to tell you how valuable, and this was in northern Alsace, just before you get to the Rhine River.
Right. Well,
And
we may have crossed
It was
paths.
in Germany because we were in the Siegfried Line. We had captured 2 pillboxes. And the Germans wanted those pillboxes back. And we spent 4 days fighting daily, hour by hour. The worst, I call it the worst 4 days of my time on line in Europe. We were never in the same place unless we were in a defensive position. And this way we were attacking into Germany. However, the day we went in was the day the bulge started, 75 miles north. We didn't know this as young soldiers, but what had happened was the 7th Army had been told to get out and retreat about 20 miles to better defensive positions. And they left us hanging there for 4 days. My company, which is about 150 men that are in the fighting elements of a company, had 16 men killed and 22 men wounded in those 4 days. And the most difficult part of the whole thing was, if we took a mule up to the top of the hill, when we got through unloading it, we had to put our dead on the mules. And I can tell you that was one of the most egregious duties I ever had in the Army, was to take a buddy of yours and tie him on that mule after he'd been killed. But because the mule skinners would not come up from the bottom of the hill up to the top, the GIs had to do it. So I wanted to add that to your story because...
That's very nice. We did that same lower, taking the bodies back, as I said earlier, at Casino. By that time, we hadn't learned enough to stay away, so we took the mules up.
Well,
But, you know, my mother was a little distressed because I was the youngest of 4. And when I went off to ski in the Alps, it turned out to be something else, as you noticed, Mother was upset that I was going off to fight, quote, the Hun, as my father said. And 2 years later, Mother got 4 missing in action telegrams in the same week. In those days, the government didn't send somebody out to sympathize with you. They sent you a telegram. We regret to inform you that your son Edward has been killed in action, or is missing in action, whatever the wording was, depending upon your condition. So my poor mother got 4 of those in a week, 1 for each son. And her hair turned absolutely white in that week. So, you know, she had a tough time at home, just worried about the 4 of us. We all got back eventually, which is a whole nother story. Any other questions? And thank you for that. That was good. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what's confusing to me is how a graduate of such a pseudo-illustrious college as Williams never made it beyond master sergeant.
Now, you sound like a Harvard man, number 1.
Fortunately not, I'm an Amherst man.
Oh, that's even worse. Well, I'll tell you. The introduction that I got was a little false, that I didn't graduate at that time. I was still a brand new kid. I was just a freshman and a half, or half a sophomore, whichever is the right term. The Army wouldn't take the Amherst fellows, so they asked us to go instead. Any other question? Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask a little more about that white mule. How did it get there, why, and how do you make a white mule?
You have a genetic problem that Malthusian thought up about 100 years ago, the Malthusian theory of genetics, and who he bred with, I haven't the slightest, or how he was bred, except he was produced like any other, quote, mule. And I guess that nature every now and then turns out an albino, which is what he was. His eyes were pink and white. He wasn't any better mannered than anyone else, any other mule. But he was a white one. And matter of fact, he's the only one I saw in my 5 years and 4 months. Was the only albino I ever saw. He didn't make it because he got ML109 picked him off, but he was interesting mule. Yes, sir.
Why would they even have a white mule?
That's the Army wisdom. He's a mule. He's available. We spent 2 cents to buy the damn thing. We're going to use him. To answer your question. I mean, really. A lot of these mules were remounts from that foreign land of Texas and Oklahoma, those type of places, where they were bred. They're still breeding jackasses, forgetting the politicians. They're still breeding jackasses. And all throughout the South is a big, big job. They're breeding because they're great for farming, for hauling logs, for all kinds of other jobs other than fighting. Yes, in the back.
Are you still have relations with mules?
Well, now, if I were Amherst, I'd tell you that. But since I went to that educational institution of finer learning, I'd have to say, could I shoe a mule? Yes. Could I drive a mule? Yes. Will I want anything to do with him again? No. That's the best. I don't think I ever got a license. When I got out of the master sergeant, I didn't have to worry about the critters.
Do they have any special branding?
Yes. Each mule is branded, except for that one that I showed you that looked so pretty with an S on it, and we all called her Katie, which I've never figured out why. They had a letter of the alphabet usually signified the enlisted man directly in charge. For example, if you're a recruit out of Amherst College this time, and you're given the mule, you could have the letter P on it, if it wasn't already taken. Their numbering system was unique to the Army, and I haven't the slightest idea how they arrived at it. I asked, I was in charge of finding out. I never found out how they numbered them. But the letters usually were the first soldier to take that mule under command, if you will.
Each mule had a separate number?
Yes. Actually, I hate to say this, but it's very similar to the numbering system that the prisoners used at Dachau, which is a funny way the world changes, isn't it? Question? Yes, sir.
What is the difference in carrying capacity or temperament between a hen and a mule?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
What is the difference between a mule and a henny in
All right.
capacity or temperament or whatever?
Well, a henny is the female.
I know, why don't you use those two?
They did use them. We used the female mules, but the male mules, as I said in opening remarks, they're sterile, but they don't know it. So they'll, pardon the expression, ladies, mount anything that goes by. Unsuccessfully, but they have that, I almost said teenage urge, and I'll strike that. They had that urge. Is that, I'm not sure I got your question.
Asking about carrying capacity and what have you, were they similar?
Yes, the lady mules, or the hennies, were better on on more difficult terrain. They had smaller hooves, most of them, and more delicate, believe it or not. Their hooves are better for steep hills with lots of rocks in it, or steep trails, whereas you can breed a jackass to a Belgian or a Percheron horse and get a mule with feet this big, depending on how he's bred. I mean, really big time. The logging mules in Texas and in the far west are big hoofed animals as compared to, quote, a normal mule of like so, and a henny like so. A henny's almost half again, but almost the size of a deer's track, a big deer.
Did these mule units have veterinarians?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
And they would treat any kind of wound or?
Well, they try to. I mean, most of them were saddle sores, and most of them were the soldiers' fault for the way you rigged them up. Each saddle was configured to fit a certain load. For instance, you could have a saddle that only carried grain, as opposed to carrying the beach block and the wheels like that picture of Katie. The saddles had to be measured to the mule. Perhaps you've seen horses where the spine sticks out, called spavined mules or spavined horses. If you had a spavined mule, his ribs are low, his spine is pronounced, and you would have to have a differently made saddle. The veterinarian's job was to see that they worked. He's shod, put new shoes on the mules. I learned to do that as self-defense, because when you're out in the boondocks and the mule throws a shoe, you've got to put him on a new foot very quickly, a new shoe very quickly. You use rubber shoes sometimes, you use spiked shoes sometimes, someone like a football player, you use different shoes, depending upon what you're on.
Were the casualty rates among these mule units, the soldiers of the mule units, similar to other?
Well, we went over with 600 men, came back with 18. Does that answer your question? That's all. That's the only answer I can give you. We were sitting ducks. We only went 5 miles an hour wide open with a tail breeze.
About how many mule units were employed?
There was a regiment that went to Salerno, from Salerno to southern Italy. I joined that regiment in Anzio, so there was about a regiment and a couple of companies. The other regiment, which could be 4,000 people, forgetting the mules, went to Burma.
I just couldn't understand what you said, and we heavily depended on them in Italy.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the unit.
Yeah.
Infantrymen only last about 6 months on the
That's
front
right.
line.
That's
and
right.
I wasn't in Italy.
Yeah.
But the unit I was in went all the way from Sicily
Were you the 3rd Infantry?
to Munich. Pardon?
Were you the 3rd Infantry or the 4th
The
Infantry?
45th.
45th. Oh,
We went, by the way, the I company of our regiment captured Dachau.
mm-hmm. I know it, because your commanding officer is the guy that took this surrender at Dachau.
Right.
Any other questions?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
The mules that didn't make it, they fell, they were shot, something happened. What happened to the equipment that was on that mule when you're doing a trip? And what happened to the 2 men that were supposed to be with that mule? What did they do after that?
They usually would take over somebody else's job, that some other soldier got hurt, sick, or trench foot was a bad problem. because of the mud and the temperature. The equipment that was on that mule would be divided up or left there, depending upon how important somebody thought it was. If it was a 75 millimeter pack howitzer, and you hadn't fired the one on there for a week, you'd leave it there. That's one of the reasons the America won the war. We had so damn much supplies that we just outpowered people, literally. And that's just a really tiny example. Yes, ma'am?
Do you have unions?
Have a union?
You have unions?
Used to. Don't anymore. To my knowledge, there's only a couple of us still hanging around. And I've lost touch with one of them, so I don't know. We used to meet first every year, then every 5 years, then every 10 years. You know, the war's over. It was 60 years ago or whatever it was. We weren't a specialized outfit. We were just a different outfit holding different equipment. The only problem is that most people in or out of the service didn't realize that there was a whole separate group called Mules.
There was a wonderful story, books written about the World War I mules,
Mhm.
and I remember reading them as a teenager. They were great, great stories. I wonder if you ever come across them.
I've seen a couple of books, and I can't come up with a name, but if you give... Yeah, I have. Questions? Yes,
To
sir.
explain to the audience, the mules was a common animal for units to carry artillery in World War I. However, in World War II, we had become totally addicted to the automobile and Jeeps, and we invented the four-wheel drive. No other army in World War II had a four-wheel drive vehicle, and some of them didn't even have dual-wheel rear wheels. We were the only army to have dual-wheel rear wheels on our vehicles, so we used vehicles. And I'd also tell you that Eisenhower saved the whole operation when the Battle of the Bulge came, because he moved 18 entire divisions overnight, repositioned them, so that there would be 6 divisions on each side of the German pincer at Bastogne. But to do that, he had to leapfrog units, so that no unit moved more than 100 miles. Now, he understood how trucks could move men, because in 1919, he took 200 vehicles from Fort Belvoir, Virginia, to the Presidio in California. It took him 3 months, and he had with him what was then a construction tractor. He had 2 of them. They were actually World War I artillery movers, prime movers, because there were over 200 sites from Belvoir to Presidio where there were no paved roads, and they had to drag those trucks between those unpaved sections of roadway in 1919. But he proved the use of trucks to move men, and that's what he did to save the Battle of the Bulge. And my unit was one such unit that moved 100 miles one night after we got off that hill I was just telling you about. We didn't know where we were going, but the whole division moved in 12 hours, 100 miles closer to the Bulge. Where another unit had moved 100 miles the day before, we just replaced them. And they replaced a unit who had moved into Bastogne itself. So 18 divisions were moved in order to get 6 divisions to be able to hit the Germans, to stop the Germans at the Battle of the Bulge.
I'd just like to say thank you again, Mr. Perry. We really appreciated that, and remind all of you that he's going to be speaking again in October.